Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're doing another one of those music shootout videos. Today it's Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich by Warrant
Against Open Up and Say Ahh by Poison.
A bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists that we put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So if you haven't seen one of our shootout videos before, we've done a few of these. We've done a bunch of them. So what we'll do is we'll compare the two albums, and then we'll decide which album we think is the better one. What have we done before? We did Nirvana's Nevermind versus Pearl Jam's 10. We did...
Ride the Light, or not Ride the
It was
Lightning.
Master of Puppets versus the Black Album, I think. We've done a couple.
Justice for All. I think it was Justice for All.
Yeah. Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah.
So we've done quite a few of these over the last several months, but we're looking at two classic late 80s hair metal albums. I think they're both good bands, too. I think they're both good albums. Mm-hmm. Not really sure which one I'm going to come down on. We'll start with Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich, though. Mm-hmm. This album came out in, this was late 88 when this one came out?
Early 89.
Okay, so this is early 80s. So they came out like months apart. I think you're right. So Open Up and Say Ahh was like late 88. This was early 89. Mm-hmm. Heaven was the big track off this. What was the other big track? Down Boys, I think, was also the other big track on this.
It's one of my favorites. Probably my favorite song on the album.
I think it is. It's probably my favorite song on here also. So this was like blew up. This album was everywhere. I remember seeing the videos for those two songs on MTV all the time. Mm-hmm. But like as far as the album goes, it's a really well produced album. I don't think there's a bad track on here. Like skipping through here, I mean, there's a couple tracks on the B side. The title track is probably not one of my favorite tracks.
Yeah, that probably was one of the weaker tracks.
There's a couple of them on side B that I could probably do without, but like overall, it's still a really solid album. Even I think the interesting thing about Warrant is they did this album, but they would go on to do, I think, even better things in their career, especially after the early 90s when people stopped listening to hair metal and listening to bands like Warrant. I think is when Warrant really kind of took off creatively. But it's still kind of cool to go back and listen to this early period because musically it is different than what they did. Because if you don't listen to those last probably like 5 or 6 Warrant albums, I highly recommend going back and checking them out because there is still ties to the early stuff. The stuff in the mid 90s and on, it had this like harder kind of, I don't want to say grunge, but it had this harder rock vibe that they incorporated in with this like classic Warrant sound. Mm-hmm. That's why I said I think some of the stuff later in the career is actually better.
It's a little bit, it's a bit more,
maybe more
rougher
diverse.
Edge and just more straightforward, like aggressive rock rather than kind of poppy rock.
And this was like, I think this album, even though it is good, I think it is kind of a cliche late 80s
it's
rock
got
album.
some pop elements to it, which actually I found charming on a re-listen.
Yeah. I mean, this is an album I really enjoy. This album, I still listen to it. I've listened to it my entire life. Well, I shouldn't say my entire life, but ever since it was released, I've been listening to it. And like I said, if you're unfamiliar with what they did after like Cherry Pie, which Cherry Pie, I'm not a huge fan of that album.
It's got some good tracks.
It's got some good tracks on it, though. But like I said, the stuff they do later in their career, I think is really where Warrant kind of took off musically.
For me, Cherry Pie was my introduction to Warrant, really, more or less. And I really never listened. I didn't have this. I had my sister had Cherry Pie on cassette. She never listened to it. I listened to it. Yeah. But I never really listened to this too much other than like you said, the 2 singles. I always liked the singles, but it was something I came across later. Yeah. So probably into my 20s or something, really, when I sat down and really listened to this album. And I haven't listened to it in a long time up until for this show. So
the funny thing is, I shouldn't say the funny thing, but the interesting thing about Warrant is a lot of their later stuff isn't even available on vinyl. They're one of those bands that I've said for the last couple of years, they really need to do like
some reissues.
Like a full catalog box set. I think it'd be perfect for the band. Because, yes, I think some of those later albums probably wouldn't sell really well individually. But I think like as a box set, I think they'd sell just fine.
Probably.
So Open Up and Say Ahh by Poison. This was their second studio album, right? After Look What the Cat Dragged In. Mm-hmm. So this came out in late 88, or I think it was later part of 88. Mm-hmm. And I think this is an album that's kind of the opposite of the way I look at Warrant. Mm-hmm. So I think Warrant would go on to do better things. I kind of think this is the peak for Poison.
Yeah, Flesh and Blood maybe.
Yeah, I mean they're kind of neck and neck.
Neck and neck, yeah.
So this album was really similar. This album, when it came out, was just everywhere. What were the big tracks that were on here?
Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
Nothing But a Good Time. There's some other ones on here. Look But You Can't Touch.
Yeah, that's
Fallen Angel. There's a lot of. I guess like looking at the track listing,
this had a lot of hits.
They had a lot of hits on this one. I feel like there were more filler tracks on this album though than there was on Dirty Rotten Filthy Stinking Rich. Even though there's I think bigger tracks on this album than the other one.
For me, this one I definitely had and listened to a lot more because I had this on cassette. My stepbrother had it on cassette, so we were always listening to it at some point or another. And re-listening to it, I don't know if it holds up as well for me.
Yeah,
as you know, like I said, there's a certain charm to some of the poppier elements of the Warrant album that I don't think are present here. And maybe that's a good thing because maybe it's not quite as dated.
Yeah,
but it's still very dated. They're definitely both albums are both products of their time period for sure.
I feel like you're right. I think when like going back and listening to this album again, it does have a very dated sound to a lot of.
Well, that's not what bothers me about it. It just I didn't click with me the way that the Warrant album did, and maybe it's the nostalgia of that time period and some of those popular elements, like I said, really kind of charmed me a bit. But they're definitely not as present here, except on those tracks that are radio played today, still today. And without those tracks, I don't think the album holds up as well.
It might not. And that's like going back and listening to it. You're right. And I when I say dated, I mean the filler tracks on this album, the stuff that's outside of those big tracks, to me have a very dated late '80s sound. Where I don't feel like that the Warrant album has that same kind of element.
Not in the same sense. It's dated in its own way, but again, like I said, to me, what dates that is it's part of its charm.
Yeah.
And listening to it in 2024 anyway.
Yeah. I guess also there was this like negative thought around Poison and the way Poison presented themselves, and they were like the pinnacle. They were like the antithesis of that like hair metal look. Was Poison, and especially around this time period. So maybe that's why I kind of have some, even though I do enjoy this album, I have some like negative thoughts or negative memories about this also, because this is also around the same time that I was getting into Guns N' Roses and some heavier stuff like Metallica also, and getting away from that hair metal stuff of the middle part of the 80s.
I will say this, if what I did notice on the re-listen is the guitar solos on this album are better than Warrant's. Warrant's are kind of generic and basic. The guitar solos on this are really good.
Yeah, CeCe DeVille is a great guitar player.
They're, kind of... I was actually surprised that I hadn't noticed it before, how good some of the solos on this were.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of the way I look at these two albums when I look at them is, I think, like overall, I think the musicianship on this album stands out a little bit more. Because you're right, CeCe DeVille is a great guitarist. The drumming on this album is great. The bass on this album is great. And I think like some of the poppiness of this album kind of plays into some of that also. Maybe that's why it stands out a little bit more than it does on Warrant. But like I said, if you go through like Warrant's discography, I think they would do better things musically later on down the line.
Yeah.
The other thing I never really understood about this album is why this was edited. So on cassette, there's a black bar across the top and the bottom. I guess it's just because of the tongue.
Right.
It's like the whole satanic panic of the 80s. I'm sure probably played a role into that. But, it's not that bad. It's just a demonic woman with a long tongue.
It's not even demonic. She's like a cat lady. She's got like cat eyes, and the paint's kind of like what you'd see in like a bad production of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. But again, even the teeth, are really kind of just like cat-like.
Yeah, I just never understood why it needed to be.
She does have a nose ring, but
Woo. All right, so this is part of the episode where we pick one. I'll let you go first. Which one would you pick? Which
if you
album
had asked
is the best
this
album?
is the funny thing. So if you'd asked me that question when I was younger, I would have said Poison.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say Warrant because, like I said, on re-listening to both of them back to back, I actually enjoyed listening to the Warrant album more than I did the Poison one maybe because I didn't know it as well.
Yeah.
That could be something, but like I said, there's a certain charm about some of those poppier elements, and even some of the songs that aren't necessarily poppy songs. There's really good hooks, like almost pop-like hooks in there that are just very charming, and I really enjoyed listening to the album.
Yeah, it's tough. I go back and forth on this one. I'll actually fall a little more on the side of Poison because I love the poppiness of that album also, and I think what stands out more to me are the quality in some of those bigger hits.
Right.
And even though there is, I think, more filler on the Poison album than the Warrant album, I think overall it's a better album overall, especially like you said,
it probably
is
with
the guitar playing on there,
and even production level. I'm sure I feel like it's probably a better album.
Yeah.
But I just went solely on just how I felt listening to the two albums.
I get that. And I think, like I said earlier, I think Warrant would go on to do bigger, better things in their career, and this was kind of it for Poison. I think this album like perfectly encapsulates what Poison was, especially at that time period, and kind of like the end of that hair metal era. Well, that's all we got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think is the better album, Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich, or Open Up and Say Ah. Love to know what you guys think about them. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.